Hi everyone, thanks for taking your seats. I'm super excited for this next session, I hope you all are too. Everybody come back please. Okay, so for those that don't know me, I'm Jenny from North Sydney, Manager of Corporate Planning and Engagement, and some of you I met yesterday. As I said, I'm super excited for this session. Our speaker today has a combined experience of 15 years on the front lines of diplomacy and conflict, and a professional career that has taken him to all corners of the globe. That's pretty impressive. Specialising in remote leadership, isolation, resilience, and leadership through adversity. His story is a unique example of adventure and challenges in the harshest conditions and circumstances. Returning to Australia in early 2021 after an epic 537-day Antarctic expedition, he has led a team through an extended stay on the ice. Many of us may have read it recently in the local medias. And facing uncertainty and adversity, he returned to a changed world and is now working hard to teach others what he learned about resilience, motivation, inspiration, and endurance. Please welcome David Knopf.
Thank you very much for that introduction, which is a lot better than before when someone asks, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "David from Port Melbourne," or, Port Phillip Council in Victoria. So I'm starting to think, so I'll quickly tell you the story of why I'm here, of getting here today as well, which is just another little tale of, I think I'm becoming a bit like Tom Hanks of just don't travel with that guy because it doesn't tend to go to plan. So I woke up at 4 o'clock, had a 6 o'clock flight. I'm like, plenty of time. I'm on at 3 o'clock, jump on the plane. And last night as well, I was calculating, okay, I've got, if a book weighs 400 grams, I can put 15 in carry-on and put the other books in the suitcase and we'll work it all out and everyone will get a book and all be happy. Anyway, we take off, we get to somewhere over Newcastle, and then the planes have the light fittings have fallen off the ceiling, and they're like, oh, we can't fix that in Newcastle, so we divert to Canberra, and we're sitting there in Canberra going like, everyone off the plane for a broken light bulb, a light fitting, and just going like, well, and I messaged my agent and said, well, thank God you put me on the bloody 6 a.m. flight. So sometimes it is good to plan ahead, and sat there, and we eventually did get back on the plane, and I'm here with you today, but unfortunately I don't have the 50 odd books because Qantas somehow in that, even though we didn't change planes, my bags got to Canberra or something, and so I landed and had a missed call from Qantas baggage handlers. I'm like, this isn't going well. So there's 15 books, of which they're going to organise to work out how to pick the 15 lucky people to get one of the books. For anyone else that doesn't, you can get in all good bookstores and everything afterwards. The other great thing is, thanks to Jeff, so sitting in on that last presentation, I learned a lot about the crowd and some of the things and different themes that I'll talk about today. So not just telling you my story of what it was like to get stuck in Antarctica for a year and a half while the whole world changes and goes backwards and you get stuck there far longer than anyone expected. But I reckon there'll be quite a few things that might be of interest to you in terms of the planning systems and everything we use down there, the leadership styles, and the system of governance that I used on the Antarctic station, which I was just jotting down some notes before. Running an Antarctic station, and I've been an Antarctic voyage leader as well, it's one of the last bastions of true isolated leadership where you can't just do a Teams meeting back to Canberra or Kingston or consult external partners. It really comes down to who's on the ground, what resources have you got, what policies you've got, and then how can you adapt those policies to get the results you need or change them to create a different situation. So it's equal parts dictatorship, democracy, and socialist in terms of you can't just decide what you want to do. You do need to make sure, because you have to live with the crowd that you lead. So if you do make a hard decision, you have to make sure that it's justified and moral and acceptable, so that at the end of the day you can all sit around and be friends and that no one drops a weight on you in the gym or something accidentally. Anyway, so before I went down to Antarctica, I'd spent 15 years working in international relations. I was a graduate from Monash University down in Melbourne. I studied arts and with history and politics double major, and decided that I wanted to actually get out there and be part of international relations and the world. And I joined the Army Reserve while I was at uni, and then signed up for a short full-time stint. Went over to the Solomon Islands as a platoon commander when I was just 22, leading a platoon of 30 soldiers over there as part of the Regional Assistance Mission Solomon Islands, which was my first foray onto the world stage of, okay, this is what it's like to be part of an international coalition, helping bring peace and stability to the small nation of the Solomon Islands. And interestingly, the whole Regional Assistance Mission Solomon Islands back then, and that's in 2007, had gone in because all the residents had opposed the government's relationship with China getting too strong. They'd burnt Chinatown to the ground. There was a whole rise of anti-Chinese sentiment. And here we are 20 years later with pretty much the same issues in the Solomons. And of course, Ramsay's net been withdrawn from there as well, and we'll see where it goes. But these were issues that were first or in the front of our minds back then. After that, I decided a career in uniform wasn't going to be for me and joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I spent a couple of years in Canberra and then one of my first posting over there to Pakistan. I was there for nearly 4 years, right at the height of the war. So I was there from 2011 to 2015 as the war in Afghanistan was kind of going down in terms of, I'd like to say, when I got to Pakistan, this criteria for success of the war in Afghanistan was we're going to get women's education, global stability, or like regional stability, economic stability. We're going to have all these things. By the time I left Pakistan in 2015, or I think it was early 16 even, and by the time we actually left Afghanistan in 2022, the criteria for success was leave. And that was quite a fascinating view of everything that happened there. And then I went to Turkey for a year, worked freelance for the UN and some journalist stuff, and then went back to Foreign Affairs and Trade, went into Iraq with the coalition task group to defeat ISIS, and spent a year in there embedded with coalition troops just north of Baghdad as we helped train and assist and advise the Iraqi forces against ISIS. And it was around that time, or there was one particular night flying back down from the base that I was at, back down to Baghdad. We were on a Black Hawk heli. Actually, Jeff was talking about Black Hawks before, so this is my Black Hawk story. Well, you know, same thing, it's all good. All Black Hawk stories are cool. So sitting there, you're on your Black Hawk helicopter, it's pitch dark except for like a thin red line on the Iraqi sunset. You've got fires in the distance, you've got the call to prayer playing, you've got Apache gunships flying in escort in blackout conditions. You can just see the silhouette on the sky and you're going like, this is pretty cool. And I remember just sitting there on that helicopter. I'd been flying around for ages, just going, I'm so bored, I'm so sick of this. Can't I just be in a bed, lying there in Melbourne, staring at the ceiling with like screaming kids or something? And I went, well, I bet you the guy that's lying there staring at the roof with screaming kids is probably wanting to be on a Black Hawk in the middle of Iraq. And I thought, all right, it's time to do something different with your life. So I thought I'd join the Australian Antarctic Program. This was, I then finished in Iraq, moved back to Melbourne, spent a couple of years there kind of sorting my life out, and then signed up for a 1-year gig as the station leader at Davis Station. And I would be leading a team in the first summertime of 2019-20 of 100 expeditioners, and then at the end of that summer season, the icebreaker Aurora Australis would come back for its last visit to Antarctica, pick up most of the summering team, leaving us with just 24 expeditioners to run the station through the winter time. And later that year, in around November 2020, Australia's new icebreaker that was being built in Romania at the time would have been finished, completed sea trials. It would come and pick us up and take us home. If the icebreaker couldn't get finished in time, they'd be able to fly us in and out. We've had an air link into Antarctica since 2007, I think it is, and we could fly people in and out. And if that didn't work, and this is again talking about planning and contingency, if that didn't work, it's all right. There's a really good international relationship with all the other partner nations down in Antarctica. So if we couldn't use our own ship, we can't use our own planes, we can use, we'll be able to get a few berths on the Japanese ship or the Chinese vessel, and we'll be able to charter another ship and we'll make it all work. What no one ever expected was that, well, we did expect that the icebreaker wouldn't get finished on time. It's a big capital procurement of a government ship. Chances of that finishing on time weren't there. So when we were told, okay, that's not going to happen, we're like, all right, cool, that's all right. You can fly us out or you can use international ships. What no one ever expected, that they would lose all three of those avenues of getting us home and leaving us there for far longer than expected. Has anyone been to Antarctica, actually? No? All right, I will try and keep it a little bit interactive because I know I'm the last thing between you and a booze cruise. So if you do start disappearing, I'll try and ask you questions about penguins. But if you do have any quick questions on distances or locations or what kind of penguin that is in the photos that come up as they go, feel free to shout out. But if you've got any big questions about like, how did you manage sex on station? Save them to the end and we'll tell you some of the stories about how you manage. And feel free to hit me with any of the other questions. But The sheer logistics of the place mean that every year the ice-breaking ship that we have, be it the Aurora Australis or the Noina or a charter ship, visits each of the continental stations just once. So you have to plan for a whole year's worth of supplies and equipment and stores for a one shot, one visit per year drop off. The stations are oversupplied with about a 2-year backup, so that in our situation or any other situation where a ship can't get there, you've got 2 years of food and fuel, but you start to run out of a lot of small things. And for the tradies and the logistical planning stuff around all your local government pothole filling sort of side of things, if that doesn't get done properly, and it doesn't always get done properly, you end up going, well, we can't finish that job, and there's a lot of half-finished jobs waiting on extra concrete or extra timber or extra whatever it is because it didn't get ordered properly, and you've got this 2 or 3 year kind of planning cycle to make it work. So the way the year played out, dropped off in summer 2019-20 on the Aurora Australis, over ice resupply as if a ship's alongside back home, and that first summer, and the colour coding pretty much matches the mood of the team as the year went on. The first summer went to plan, everyone's getting what they wanted. You're getting what the recruiting team told you you'd get. You're down there to work, you're a plumber, you're a sparky, you're a scientist or whatever it is. You're down there, you're getting your job done. You're also socialising, Christmas parties. You know, Christmas in Antarctica is a white Christmas, which for Australians is rare, and you're having all that sort of fun. And you go, okay, that's pretty good. And anyone can get through that first couple of months, no dramas. On the 9th of January, we first heard that there's some sort of a flu outbreak in China. And we all went, well, where the hell's Wuhan and what? But they'll be fine. And they started, the Antarctic program said, hey, we're going to declare an emergency. It's a precautionary thing, but we're going to start to limit southbound travel until we know more about this virus. And we sort of went, all right. Me and the one doctor on station had a bit of a chat. We went, yeah, that sounds fair. If you don't know much about this virus, we don't have any ventilators. We're really only geared for Antarctic-style medical emergencies, so cool, they're going to limit the southbound travel and we'll wrap up the summer season and that'll be it. And the ship will come back, pick up the summerers and leave us for the winter. They'll sort out the new icebreaker and they'll get us all home by November. Sounds like a good place to be. And when the ship came back and picked up that team, we were there really fairly certain that it would go roughly to that plan. And if you cast your minds back to March 2020, that was when everyone was told, no, it's all right, it's just 2 weeks to flatten the curve. You'll be, this lockdown won't last. It'll all be back to normal by the end of the year. When it got to the 25th of April, and we were one of 5 places on Earth to have an Anzac Day ceremony that was publicly attended, albeit only by 24 of us, that's when we knew that 2020 was certainly going pear-shaped very quickly. But the mood was still relatively strong. We weren't missing much. People were starting to call us and say, what are you doing down there for isolation? What do you do when you're all stuck indoors with lockdowns and when you can't travel? How do you create the fun and how do you fix that? And I'll start to go into those lessons in a little bit after the background. By midwinter, June 21st, the winter solstice, it's pitch black, 24 hours a day in the middle of winter. We cut a hole in the ice and go for a swim. So it's minus 20 degrees. You cut a 2 metre by 2 metre square in the ice. The ice is nearly 2 metres thick itself. You have to have someone stirring it so it doesn't refreeze. You jump in for about 30 seconds in your ice bath, jump out, which is far worse than getting in, and then quickly try and warm yourself up. But that's the most historic celebration on the calendar down there and marks more than the halfway mark because at that point we should have been coming home 133 days later when the first flights or the ship were going to come and get us. That red dot, 23rd of June 2020. Went into my office, had a meeting with my boss as we used to do kind of every other day, and he just flatly said, he's like, look, the ship's not going to be ready in time. I'm like, yeah, no surprise there. He's like, and we're not going to have aviation this season either. And I'm like, so what does that mean? He's like, well, you'll be there until sometime in early 2021 when we can charter another ship, be prepared to stay another winter and a whole other year. You've got enough food and fuel, and how do you want to break the news? And I said, look, I'll just go tell everyone, we'll just rip the Band-Aid off and do it. And I'd never thought of this angle before, but in terms of stuff we talked about before about local government and connection to the team and people connection to your community and people not understanding it, probably the world's best example of a community getting told something by big government that they had no ownership of, no say in, no consultation. We were simply told, cool, there's absolutely no way to come and get you as planned. You're all there for at least a lot longer than you wanted to. And as much as everyone in that room understood it, it was our partners, families, sick parents, workplaces, etc. back home that weren't in that room and didn't have someone there to kind of talk to them about it. That was then, from that point on, out of our control. And from that point on as well, rather than just leading a station team of people that were pretty much getting what they wanted to get, knowing that it'd be a challenge to be in Antarctica for a year, from that point, there was a clear split of everyone's now in a situation they didn't want to be in, myself included. And it was, how do you now repackage that, face that challenge, reframe it and try and understand it to do your best to get to the end individually and as a group. That became the challenge. If that wasn't bad enough, when it got to the original return date of November, was when it started to go from bad to worse. Morale was low, should have been going home. So any issues, someone would be like, I'm not supposed to be here. And you're like, well, you are here, so how about you act professionally? So that sort of stuff started to creep in. And then 10 days before Christmas, you're getting ready for your second white Christmas, which wasn't nearly as exciting as the first one, but you're still going, oh, you know, it could be worse. Some people back home weren't allowed to have 24 people at a Christmas party, so you go, all right. The doctor walks into my office and just goes, what do we do if we had a medical emergency now? And again, back to the planning side of things, there was a loose plan. I'm like, well, there's not much, mate. If there was a way to get people out of here easily or quickly, we would have done it, and half the team would have gone home, half would have stayed, and we would have got some fresh air in, and we would have been all right. And he's like, yeah, but what would we do? I'm like, okay, cool. And I flipped over to a map, a kind of sky scanner map tracker thing that had, the year before, had dots all over it. Tourist ships, Chinese ships, Japanese ships, Russian vessels, Indian chartered Russian vessels, all sorts of stuff sailing around Antarctica. Every illegal whaling ships pop up there as well. You've got all this stuff on this map, and I turned onto the map and it had two things. It had a Chinese icebreaker somewhere between New Zealand and Antarctica, and an American plane 5,000 kilometres away at McMurdo Station. And I said to him, I'm like, hypothetically, if we put the helicopter off that ship and could come here twice and take a bunch of people up to a runway and build a runway inland, and then a plane could come and we could do these things, and you know, geez, it'd be impossible to do, but hypothetically, if we had a critical emergency, we could do it. And I just looked back at the doctor standing in my office and realised, I'm like, this isn't a hypothetical scenario. He's like, it is not. There's someone in the ward with a medical emergency that needs to get back to Australia for urgent treatment. And I'm like, all right, let's do that. So I went back, called the same boss that had told me a few months earlier that, hey, you're staying, and got to tell him, like, hey, by the way, you need to get me, I need the Chinese helicopter on these dates off that ship to do this, and I need the American plane repositioned from here to here to here, and it all needs to line up. We need a weather window to do this, and we need to coordinate all these assets over half the southern hemisphere, and I need that plane and a plane from Australia to Casey Station, which was the other station nearby, to make it all happen and get this guy back to Australia, and I need to put another chaperone on that plane as well. And to his credit and the credit of the Antarctic program and their emergency mindset, they just went, cool, yep, if that's what you need, let's do it. And the doctors obviously had back-ended the other part of it. And then for the next 10 days, we worked flat out round the clock to evacuate a patient and one other to Australia under full COVID protocols, meaning that any time the patient or others went one direction, they had to be either in that full PPE. No one could interact between the Chinese helicopter and the American plane at the handoff, so they had to put the patient on the ground and kind of step away. And then the Americans come and pick them up, kind of like a drug deal, trying to exchange or something. I've never done one, but I assume that's how they go down, like you see in the movies. And that's how that played out. And then all was said and done, 10 days later, after working flat out around the clock as a team, we're down to 22 people. And I looked at my watch when it was all said and done. It was 0300 on the 24th of December, 2020. And then as a group, we sat down the next day for Christmas lunch, and it was a pretty quiet and somber mood. We were proud of what we'd done to achieve that medical evacuation and everything else, but at the same time, there was nothing to celebrate. It was one of the flattest, and it still gets me today, to talk about the mood in that room. A week later at New Year's Eve, it was the best party I've ever been to. Everyone had actually relaxed a bit, unwound, and we thought that finally that's it, we'll be home in a few months. The ship that they chartered to come and get us was resupplying Casey Station, go back to Hobart, come and pick us up, and off we'd go. Finally got on the ship in March 2021, handed over the station, did the resupply and everything. We're like, great, we're going to go home. We had to go past Mawson Station and pick their team up as well. So we do that. And finally, in early April 2021, the ship turns north. We get ready to cross the Southern Ocean. You go, right, that's it. 2 weeks from now, we'll be back sailing up the Derwent and into Hobart, and it's done. What a journey. Thank God it's over. Strapping down your bags, because crossing the Southern Ocean's rough at the best of times, and that'll be it. And as a now retired station leader, I thought, oh, no, great, I'll just relax, read books, write my report, and that'll be it. At 10:58 on the 5th of April, I heard something that still rings in my ears when I think about it right now, and that was as I was having a nice little nana nap before lunch, the clear sound of the ship's fire alarms with the captain directing everyone that fire, 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 fire in the engine room, not a drill, not a drill. I quickly woke up, realised my cabin was pitch black, I could smell smoke. I went to open the door, blackness, you can see smoke and you can see expeditioners and crew trying to get their survival bag, their immersion suit and their life jacket and their boots and their jackets and all that sort of stuff together to scramble down to the forecastle, which is a kind of forward enclosed area of the ship, and muster next to the lifeboats while we contemplated our fate and what was ahead of us, not knowing anything about the actual condition of the ship or how bad the fire was. For the next hour or two, while the crew and a number of the team jumped on fire hoses and fought the fire to get that under control, we're then faced with the second prospect of how much damage has this done to the ship. We're in 6-metre swells, 100-metre vessels, pretty solid, rolling 30 degrees from side to side while we stood there. And the dead silence of a ship with no engines in the middle of nowhere is a very, very loud silence as we contemplated what we were going to do. Eventually, 6 hours later, they were able to get the fire out, account for everyone, and get one engine restarted, and we limped home to Fremantle 537 days since we'd left Australia, with a whole range of things to tell. And people often ask, when did you decide to write a book? And my answer is simply, when I was standing in the forecastle of the Everest for 6 hours, looking at the lifeboats and looking at the 6-metre waves and contemplating what that was going to be like. That's when I thought I'll probably get a book deal when I finally get home. And sure enough, I got one. So just a little bit about station life. So it's much like a small town, which I'm sure you should all be very familiar with what small towns and government's like. The green buildings in the middle of the accommodation buildings, you've got multiple diesel power generators, double or triple redundancy in almost every system. So if one powerhouse burns down, you've got another one. You've got enough food and fuel for 2 years. You've got enough accommodation buildings so that if one burns down, you can go to the other one, etc. So when it came to things like the fire on the ship, it was remarkable how well trained and rehearsed the entire team were to go, cool, we've spent a year and a half living in a situation where you have to consider fire and contingency and planning every single day of the week, whereas a number of the ship's crew and others who hadn't been through that for the last, well, it hadn't been at the forefront of their minds for as long, responded differently throughout that phase of the journey. The other question I love answering is, do you count penguins? And you don't sit there with the notepad and pen and try and count them. You go, just stop moving. But we do count penguins using time-lapse cameras. So these sit out at all the penguin rookeries around Antarctica. Or these are, can anyone tell me what kind of penguins these are? Emperor, yep, correct. Emperor penguins. One of my favourite facts, it's almost sad as well though, is that emperor penguins are a species that really only live in Antarctica. And humans have only gone down there for the last sort of 200 years since we've even sighted Antarctica, and 100 years since we've really been exploring it. So that's a species that for millions of years never interacted with humans and never had any engagement with us, and we've never really lived with them, and they've never lived with us. They live and nest and breed on the sea ice in the winter time and are one of the most susceptible species to climate change. So that's a species that is now not being affected by climate change due to deforestation or hunting or anything like that. This is one of the species that is very indirectly affected, that if the sea ice isn't thick enough, it's not constant enough, and it keeps changing, as it is starting to show impacts of, species such as emperor penguins will be impacted by that from another species such as ourselves and our impact on the planet, which is a tragedy. So some of the stuff we do out there now to count those populations and monitor them gives us a good deal of information on how they're changing, how they're adapting. The good news is that they are quite adaptable, and they've shown signs that, well, they might start to nest on land. They might work out other ways around it. Like they'll watch the other penguins that nest on land and go, oh, why do we breed on the sea ice? We could go on the rocks. But that's where the Adelie penguins go. We go here. We're emperor penguins. That sort of stuff. But the average day, so another, anyway, tell me what sort of penguin that is on the top right there. That's the Australia Day cricket game in January 2020. It's a Slips penguin, correct, yeah. Yeah, good answer. That's an Adelie penguin. So they don't have great eyesight on land, probably similar to our eyesight underwater. So they see shapes and movement and they tend to walk over and have a look. He's just a curious little bystander. And one of my favourite days down the bottom there, flying in a helicopter across the glacial edge of it. You know, those cliffs are about 200 feet high, but with no scale to sort of indicate it's hard to see. But one of the most spectacular things, if you ever get a chance to fly in a helicopter across an Antarctic glacier, I can highly recommend it. For the plane spot, and this is the last slide of sunshine and penguins before I go into the kind of the nitty gritty of mental health and other challenges. For the plane spotters and everyone out there, that the Basler BT-67s that we use, that's one there that we share with the Chinese from one of the charter companies. One of those airframes allegedly flew over Normandy in World War II, and they're still one of the most versatile aircraft. They've been upgraded with modern turboprop engines, better avionics, and of course you can see skis there as well, but they can land them in a very short distance, almost anywhere across Antarctica on the sea ice or the plateau if they need to. All right, what did I learn? What were the takeaways? When it came to facing the adversity and the challenge that we had of, hey, you're stuck here longer than you wanted to be, and they talk as well in terms of the mental health guidelines of, well, you need something on the horizon. Swim to your horizon. For us, that horizon was A, moving, so it kept getting further away, so you didn't even know when your horizon was. And then B, that horizon was changing. So for us, it wasn't you're coming home to Australia a year later. It's what are you coming home to? We had very little understanding or visibility of what lockdowns were like, what work from home was like, how businesses were adapting, how families were homeschooling with 2 parents working from home and 2 kids in a small 2-bedroom apartment and stuff. You just go like, how? You know, so at times, being on an Antarctic station looked pretty good, but not knowing what we're coming home to was the kind of overarching dark cloud on top of us. And the sphere of control, and this stuff's straight out of the Beyond Blue playbook, the sphere of control was the one thing, if you could bring it back to that and do 2 things, you go, okay, is that in my control or not? And what can I do that's within my control to refocus myself for a bit, to stop worrying about when do I get home and what's home look like and what's going on there? What can I do this morning? I can get out of bed and I can do some push-ups. I can get dressed how I want to get dressed within the realms of I need to obviously wear thick socks. And go from there. What can I eat? Yeah, you don't have exactly all the options you want, but you can work with what you've got, make those decisions, and then work within that sphere of control. The second part of it is when you can't control something, you can control how you face it. So for me as the station leader, it was easy to just go, cool, I'm going to face this head on. This is a challenge like no one else has had in modern history, so I'm going to take that in a direction that I want to, which is I'm going to face that and make the most of it. It's going to be a train wreck along the way, but it'll be fun. You might learn something. And the other really, really important element of it, more on the community side, which is why it's kind of cut out there, is holding the line and boundaries. And this, when I got home, was something I noticed had slipped horrendously, was that boundary between work and life. On an Antarctic station, for 365 days or 537 days, it is not sustainable to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I can tell you from experience, and you've probably all learnt that over the last couple of years as well. So in terms of in your workplace as a leader or as a manager, and even as an individual or as a parent, as a family, holding those lines of, hey, it's not time to work, it's time to switch off. And for us, when it got to dinner time, at the end of dinner, you'd normally chat a bit of work at dinner, just wrapping up the day. After that, if you had a work question, you had to do the courtesy of say, hey, excuse me, do you mind if I ask you a work question? And half the time, someone would be like, yeah, whatever, like happy to chat work. But you had to respect any time they go, no, not a work thing, especially on your day off. And we often all had different items of clothing that you'd start to learn, like, oh, if you've got your work beanie on, your Australian Antarctic Program beanie on, you're at work. And if I'm wearing like my hipster kind of Melbourne beanie, I'm not at work. I had different gym kind of beanies and gears. So if you walk into the gym, you're kind of wearing your own stuff. And that mental break between I've controlled that I'm going to wear a different beanie or a different jacket or something like that was enough to go, I'm not at work today. The other big part of it, people do ask, what's resilience? It's the biggest. When I got to the publishing deal and chatting to publishers, they're like, oh, this will be a book about resilience. I'm like, it's a book about Antarctica. And they're like, can you put the word resilience in the title? And when it came to naming the book, that was one of the things they probably would have loved to have just called it Resilience, because that's going to sell books. It's very hard to define, and it's very hard to understand, and it's one of those things people can say, oh, you've either got it or you don't, or you build it here and you build it there and you do this, you be resilient. From what I've learned, from my experiences in war zones and in Antarctica, it comes down to why. Why are you there? Why are you doing something? And that can be, again, you can be resilient in one part of life and not in another. You could be resilient all day, every day, and then one day you're just not resilient when you can't find a parking space. It's because, why do you want that parking space? Because you've got to go to the doctor. You don't go to the doctor. So you go, cool, you can bring it back to, why do you want to do it? If you want to do something bad enough, you'll find a way to do it, and you'll find the energy and the motivation to get there in the end. And out of the team, and myself, I put myself in this category, and those that I felt performed better over the whole journey were those that had signed up and wanted to go down there with a pure sense of Antarctic adventure, an adventure in life. They went down there seeking it, and the minute we got given it, they just went, great, I wanted an Antarctic challenge. This is awesome. They didn't actually put in those words, I paraphrase a little bit, but that rather than those that had gone down there and said, hey, oh, this would be a good job for a year, whatevs, you know, it's good government paycheck and get away from the family for a year. At some point, you know, if you do a wagon wheel of everyone's motivation, there's that 5% of escapism when you're an expat living overseas, or you go to an Antarctic station, or you go away anywhere. There's 5%, but if that's bigger than that, you're going to have problems, and that was what we learnt, that anyone that had signed up. The lesson from that for you, for yourselves, for your teams, those you're working with, those you're trying to inspire to be more resilient, think about their why and your why. Why do you want to do it? Why do they want to do it? And how can I reshape that? How can we define that? How can I poke that why to get more out of them and get the most out of them? And if it's not there, and I had to learn this hard lesson as well, if it's not there in someone, it's impossible to create. And you have to try and then manage that from a leadership perspective or a management side, and that can be very, very difficult to work with. In terms of the other thing, we had at station, and this is probably quite relevant to government in a lot of ways, the station meeting. So every Friday afternoon we had a station meeting, and we'd sit there and forcefully, by the end of it, I'd go around the room and ask everyone, okay, have you got anything? Have you got anything? And if they sat there in silence, you'd give them something, go, but didn't you have this coming up? Give them something, try and prompt engagement with your community to get that feedback and that consultation, so you don't, your report doesn't get shot down because you didn't consult widely enough. But in that second half, so probably from about October on, almost every station meeting went somewhere towards Parliament question time in terms of just questions and everything. Why aren't they getting the Chinese ship? Why aren't they doing this? Why can't we do that? And it always had to come back to, like, we're all in the same boat here. You, me, I didn't sign up to be stuck here with a bunch of people that don't want to be here. Remember that. Remember the person next to you, on your left, on your right, and across in the circle, and we're all equal socially, is in the same boat. And I think that was something that over the last couple of years, when I got back, realised had lost, that you're building that us and them mentality between different people. So the more you can engage and build that community sense within your workplace of your problems are a shared problem. You've all worked for bad bosses, you learn a lot more from your bad leaders than your good leaders at times. But sitting back and going, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, or this woman's not doing a great job leading this team. What have you done as a team member to make them a better leader and make the team successful? And one of the best examples I know of that is that when Obama had to hand over to Trump, which I'm sure he had a lot of emotions and feelings about having to do. I'm sure he'd already written his letter to Hillary, and he had to write a letter to Trump. But he wrote on it, and I think it was a testament to his character, and just said, look, Donald, your success is our success, so I wish you all the successes. And I think that was something you go, okay, if you can learn from that and go, right, what are you doing? Because leadership success in a bad leader, you've got to make it better. And I certainly at times struggled to understand how I was going as a leader, how the other team leaders in there as well were struggling with the different challenges we had. I think we're getting close to running out of time as well. I want to leave some time for questions. In terms of finding your own motivation, and this is a little, I'll give you a little story here that kind of links back to what I was saying earlier. So who knows who this gentleman is up on the right there in his ship? Shackleton, and the name of the ship? The Endurance. So they set out at the outbreak of World War I on the Trans-Antarctic expedition to cross Antarctica. They had parties, the Ross Sea Party coming from New Zealand and Australia to set up depots and everything, and Shackleton and his team would be the first team to walk from one side of Antarctica via the South Pole across to the other. They never even made it to the continent. They got stuck in the pack ice in the Weddell Sea. The ship was hard in the ice. They sat there for ages hoping to clear. It never cleared. It was crushed by the ice. They abandoned ship onto the ice, had to drag the lifeboats, and they had it in. Shackleton came up with a plan, drag the lifeboats across the ice, we'll get to open water, we'll sail to South Georgia, and we'll be home and hosed. Until one member of his team just decided to turn around and say, you know what, Ernest? I quit. And he stood there. It was 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, going, well, mate, you can't quit. He's like, well, I do. And I always laughed at that. I remember reading that book going, what a ridiculous situation. Like, who would do that? Anyway, cut forward 100 and odd years. In October 2020, as we were spending 17 days working round the clock on shifts, refilling the station's water supply with seawater, which we had to do at that time of the year to avoid algal bloom and krill or whatever the scientists had told us. And you're working 4 hours in every 16 to walk up and down this hose, knocking the ice off it and refilling it. And at one point, I knew that we were having trouble with one member of the team who wasn't really interested in doing that. He wanted to do his primary job, and he's kind of reluctantly turning up for his shifts, and then he's not turning up for his shifts, and then he's hard to find, and he's got excuses, and I'm like, oh, this isn't going well. So I finally get him into my office and say, well, what's going on? He's like, I'm just sick of this. I didn't sign up to be a fucking plumber. Pardon my French as well. Didn't sign up to be a plumber. I want to do my primary job, and I quit. And I'm like, what? You can't quit. He's like, well, I did. And he walked out, and I thought, right, what do you do? So it's 2020 by this point, so you call HR. And so I set up a Zoom call with the head of HR and the head of operations, and I just go, look, one of the guys has just quit. And they're like, and they kind of both laughed at me and said, yeah, it happens. That happens. Happens every couple of years. Someone quits because of something. They're like, it could be you, could be him, could be both, could be the situation, could be 100 things. I'm like, all right, well, what's the standard procedure? And they're like, just give him a day or two off, and we'll reset things later. And take notes and everything. Make sure he's okay, and send someone else to kind of check on him, because we'd had a pretty heated discussion. So send my deputy station leader and the doctor and say, hey, look, this has happened. They're like, yeah, he's told everyone. So he kind of walked out of my office and told everyone what he'd done. And like, oh. So everyone knows, that's good. Give him a bit of space and go from there. And so we spent the next week kind of working out what to do, and I reset the relationship with him, and we had a bit of a chat. And at the end of the day, it came back to the sphere of control. The only thing he could control was his quitting in his mind. It came down to that. We were telling him, you've got to do the shift work on the station, on refilling the tarn. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. You're on this roster, you've got that. He wanted to do his own job, and we were saying, you can't do your primary job because that's not the priority right now. You have to do this. And his solution was, cool, I can control not turning up for work. And off he quit. We got him back to work, and then, as I said, with the medical evacuation, we needed to put a medical chaperone on there. The doctor then spent a week or two at that point training that guy to administer IV drugs and all sorts of things. We were able to get him out on that flight. And funnily enough, no one else wanted to go home when it got to that point, and we offered it to the guy that had quit and said, hey, do you want to go home as well? He said, I'd love to. The rest of the team were like, no, we're happy to stay to the end. The station needs us here to run it, and this is our fate in the whole program. Let's go from there. The lesson out of that, though, as I get towards the time to stop waffling on, was we spent a week then working on one person who was at one end of a spectrum of performance. I thought, well, what are we doing for the others? And after that, made it a much higher priority to focus on the members of the team and giving them opportunity and reward for making the most of the situation, for facing our challenge head on and going, okay, great, we've been stuck down here, but what opportunities can we find in being stuck here for a second summer? Assisting different science programs, getting out to different penguin rookeries, doing different things to seize that opportunity and go, right, every crisis is an opportunity, and they're going to take it head on. And from there, for the 22 of us that remained, had an incredibly positive experience right up until the ship caught fire. Finally, before I go to questions as well, the other mantra I live by is that if you learn something, you didn't fail. And I failed along the time. Meetings didn't go well, or we made decisions where weather went one way, it could have gone the other. Equipment was broken. We never broke a human, which was good. Besides the medical evacuation, which is a kind of different medical thing that no one could have really done much about. And at the end of the day, when we got back, we were like, okay, geez, would you recommend that? And I'm like, 100% if you're ready for it. If you want it, if you want an Antarctic challenge, I would absolutely recommend what we went through and what we did. And then weirdly enough, before someone asked me, like, would you go back? I've already been back and I'm going back again because it is a truly spectacular place. I mean, where else can you sit there with a cheese platter overlooking the Antarctic mountains over sea ice on a nice still day? It's probably about minus 20 degrees there. It's hard to show in the photo, but you get used to it. There's no ozone layer, so it's quite warm in the sun. But I've always said as well, if you learnt something, you didn't fail. And it's a great way to reframe any challenge you face in life, even when you've failed. If you're still here and you're still going, you haven't failed yet. And at worst, you learned something. All right. That's me.
Big round of applause for David.
Happy to take questions.
You can take questions. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask? I do while people are putting their hand up. But how many people are you still friends with of those 22?
Yeah, most of us are still in touch. A couple of us caught up the other day. A number of them came to the book launch. I caught up with a bunch in Hobart. There was an Antarctic festival last weekend I was down in Hobart for. Caught up with a bunch of them there. There's a couple that we're not friends, but we're professionally, that's the other one. I might not be friends with them. They certainly put my name on their job applications as a referee and stuff. You're like, yep, of course. So that's one sort of side to it. And it's a bit like a family. I think I said at that Christmas dinner on the second Christmas, so Christmas 2, that was my exact words to the group that night. Were like, well, you can't choose your family and you can't choose who you spend your second Christmas in Antarctica with. Anyway.
Aside from maybe the suspect drug business that you're running in Antarctica and looking at the penguins, I'm interested to know more about the programs and the work that's actually done down there, and importantly, how it's funded, given it's a government program. That's always a challenge for us.
Good one. So all of the scientific stuff down in this is mostly done in the summertime. A lot of it's now remote managed in the wintertime. So our wintering team only had 2 or 3 scientists. They all come from the university, so they're funded through their university funding systems, and they'll get their funding for, say, a 5-year project or a 10-year project that might involve 1 or 2 people on the ground for the 90 days of the summer season and plus 50 helicopter hours and then blah, blah, blah to make the program happen. And then X amount of people hours for the years afterwards from general station support to then go and take the memory cards out of that penguin camera or out of that atmospheric science instrument. So a lot of, there's the climate science in terms of penguin counting, sea ice monitoring, glacial retreat. And that's a lot of, again, digging something into a glacier that's got a GPS tracker in it, and then you dig that in, park it there, and then that's just going to send GPS tracking data back as it moves, as that glacier kind of moves out to sea every year. So that sort of simple stuff. And then a lot of space science and space weather. They've got these instruments that look up. You get a nice clear shot at the stars down there, and they look up and count ions in the ionosphere and those sorts of things. But yeah, in terms of the science side of it, I probably don't have a huge amount of technical knowledge beyond what I've just said. But I can happily put you in touch with someone that wants to, if you want to know more, yeah.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. I recently worked for the federal government as a team leader, and I thought when I got the job, this is brilliant. I'm just going to delegate to my team, and I'm going to kick back and just, chill and watch Netflix on my phone at my desk in my office. Anyway, and then COVID hit, and I found that I was the one that had to, everyone's looking at you. You're the one that has to, and I felt I had to do a lot more work than everyone. Was that did you have a similar experience? It was something I wasn't prepared for.
Yep.
That it's not what you think it is. It's not, I'm just going to sit back and delegate to everyone else. Everyone's looking at you for that leadership thing. Therefore, you have to put in a little bit more effort. Did you?
Yeah, and that's a lot. Look, I don't want to go into comments and discussion about the culture of the Australian Public Service in terms of that, and the Federal Public Service in terms of the way it appoints leaders and promotes people. But I'm sure you can all say, and you'd have seen this, that people get promoted through time and just through sheer lack of other options. And that's a fact of it. And then when that's fine. on it, and you can captain a ship in calm seas. The minute it gets rough, what happens to those leaders? They fall over, or they're not interested, they don't want to be leaders. I certainly had that. I had an incredible team overall, but had a few people in leadership positions. It was like, oh, look, you know, you'll do. And that would have been fine in a normal Antarctic year, but then the minute it got challenging and they had team members that weren't doing well and not communicating well with other members of the team, or competing priorities of, hey, no, everyone needs to, we've only got this many people, we should have 100, we've only got 22, we need to do this, not your project, or we're going to cut yours. They'd be like, oh, this isn't fair. And you're like, this is the reality. And it was a real difference between those that had wanted to be leaders and those that have been put in positions by default. And I think that's something that when I give these talks to emergency management and first responders, and I was talking about that side of things, one of the most important things you could do in a workplace is pick the right people for your emergency management team. And that's from your fire wardens and your first aid officers. Don't just go, oh yeah, Bob's, you know, he's available on Thursday for the first aid course. Because when someone has a heart attack, everyone will look at Bob. And Bob may not be the most suitable person. He might be the guy that knows where the defibrillator is and how to check that it's still working. Is he the guy you want putting those sticky pads on a sweaty, hairy colleague whose life is in the balance? And that's where you've got to pick your leaders. And that's something that, look, you've all learned in the last couple of years as well, that the leaders become much more important in a crisis. So it's not a surprise that you had that experience as well.
Yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then you have to wait till you get home or you've got some quiet time to have your nervous breakdown about the whole thing.
Yeah, no, good. And as a leader, it's really tough to keep yourself in check. And for me, the only other people I wanted to speak to were other station leaders, past or kind of current. And it was, and often they'd laugh at me. And I'd be like, oh, you know, guy quit or whatever. They're yeah, classic. You know, or like, this is happening, and there's a divide between like the cool kids and the scientists, and they're like, classic. And he's just like, does this happen every year? They're like, yeah, it happens every year. Like, what do you do? They're like, oh, just do the usual things, you know, more community activities, more forced fun, more ridiculous things, more dress-up parties. You're like, all right, off we go. And yeah, as the leader, you're there just doing it. And we had art shows, band nights, open mic nights, all sorts of stuff, and you feel like a parent in terms of just going like, yeah, this is going to be amazing. And you're like, oh my God, is anyone going to turn up or whatever? And you got the cool kids who are like, oh, this is lame, I'm not dressed up, I'm just like, you know, whatever. And fine, and you just try and bring your energy. And I think in terms of leadership in these scenarios, just a good amount of blind optimism and a smile is part of your job. Yeah.
David, you talked about how you delivered bad news. And that on that specific day when you found out it wasn't going to go the way you thought it would, would you have delivered that message differently?
Yeah, there's a little bit more to that. So there was two members of the team that I went and spoke to first, basically when I got straight off the phone. One had a very, very sick parent and was very anxious to get home, but they'd had a conversation with that parent before they'd even stayed in March, before the ship came, and said, hey, you know, and their parent was like, no, you stay. You want to do an Antarctic winter, don't let me be the reason you don't do it, whatever. And they didn't make it to the end, so that was one who I told. And there was another guy who had to reschedule his own wedding, and his relationship was pretty strained as it was. And I think the ring had been, you know, he's like, so I had a chat to them about it beforehand. And then, so by the time I got to the group, and again about the consultation side of things, pretty much everyone in the room knew that's where it was going, that you knew the icebreaker's not going to happen, the flight's going to be challenging, international cooperation's going to be tough. So when you're telling people that, hey, we're going to build a new train line through your backyard, that's not the first they hear about it at the announcement. It's sort of similar to that.
Coming, Donna.
You talked about the coming back and seeing what had happened in society when you got back here. What was your biggest observation with that? Like you talked about we'd lost the delineation between work and home, but what else did you observe? That
we gave up on the environment. The litter, when I got back, was whether or not that was, you know, just like we're very environmentally conscious down there, so we sort all of our recycling and there's no litter, and because you can mess with the penguins and all sorts of stuff, so we're very conscious down there about that. When I got home, and there's just masks and cups and just crap everywhere. Nothing against Port Phillip Council in Melbourne, but which was my great 5Ks though, great 5Ks, Port Phillip, Melbourne. But You guys from New South Wales, you didn't have the same lockdown. That was the thing, just trying to understand how scarred Melbourne was. And I still think it is now. Like I found when I'm in Tassie or in Sydney with these gigs, the crowds are a lot more lively and excited and just kind of normal. Whereas Melbourne's still got this like, you wouldn't understand, man. And that was hard as well to realise, like I'd been through, myself and my team had been through this ridiculous scenario. But for a lot of people in Melbourne, they'd had a harder time of it because either they didn't have the networks there or it was so far out of their comfort zone. They'd never expected these things and they didn't adapt, or they really struggled with work and homeschooling and all these things that was hard to see how it had changed, and acknowledging that, yeah, there was some people that had a really rough time being stuck at home. And it's the context of where you're at. And you see this with veterans as well. That's not necessarily someone that saw their mate blown in half by an IED. It can be the guy that never saw an IED, but went out every day for a whole tour, expecting to stand on a landmine or something, and never did, can be just as scarred or more scarred than others. So they were my two things. But the work-life boundaries was one that shocked me, because it's easy. You just go, no, that's a work thing. That can wait.
Two questions. Did I hear on a radio interview that you guys watched the Martian movie after you got the announcement?
We did, yep.
Was there any kind of reflection from that and go,
Yeah,
oh my God, we're going to live this movie? And is Matt Damon going to suddenly appear out of nowhere or something like that?
That's actually a good passage in the book. If I had the book with me, I'd read that little passage. But that was, we watched The Martian that night, and has everyone seen it? Everyone's seen it. So there's that scene there, sort of the astronauts are all there, and Mike Watney or Matt Damon's stuck on Mars, nothing to do, and you've got Jeff Daniels and everyone standing there going like, well, what about if we did this? What if we did that? What if we did that? And during that scene, one of the guys just sort of went, the government right now trying to work out how to get us. And it was pretty accurate and pretty funny, but it was one of those sort of scenarios. And yeah.
And my second question is, you probably had a fixation on that date to go, and then it just got moved. How do you keep morale up? Was it kind of just chunking week after week, not kind of focusing it's further than what we were to start with, or was it kind of just chunking it down into bite-sized pieces? We just got to get through today or this week, then we'll look at next week. That type of approach, was that kind of
absolutely? It was equal parts. Yes, just okay. What's on today? What's on tomorrow? And that's sphere of control side of things. If this is our plan, and this is your individual plan, this is the station plan, this is the week and the monthly plan, and then the thing. The other one was I was really keen to get this of that horizon of what does the end look like, no matter when it is. The more we could plan and be involved in that voyage, and for a lot of the team, it was then getting involved that we'd have to do this fly-off resupply at Mawson Station on the way home because the ice was too thick, so we had to do like a helicopter resupply for them. To get involved in the voyage and what the end looked like was actually really important. So that didn't matter when that was, but they knew that we were sort of still involved and not just going to become passengers. That was another part. So yeah, you've got right in front of you, but also cool. Whenever that is, what does it look like? The Antarctic program did a good job trying to acclimatise us to understand what was happening back in Australia. Mixed results with that, I think, because we were from, out of 24 of us, there was 3 women, 21 men, 5 Kiwis, mostly Australians. Most of those Kiwis lived in Tasmania and stuff anyway. So, but it was so hard to know what your home was like that we're just like, cool, what does the voyage look like? What's that? What about the ship and the plan? So, yeah. And again, when your mind wanders outside of that chunking, how do you come back to, well, I can control next week, so I'll just do that and forget about February or whatever.
David, thanks so much. I've been really loving... Oh, I'm over here.
Yeah, that's
Great speech. Loved it. What's next? I know you said that you're going to be going back to Antarctica, but then will you just always go to Antarctica, or like what's next for you? Yeah,
good question. So yeah, I went back earlier this year. I went back as a voyage leader. I did the resupply to Davis and Mawson stations on a cargo ship. This summer I'm going to go back as a deep field leader. So there's a small old station halfway between Davis and Casey, which I don't know if you remember from the map, but we're going to set up So it'll be me and a team of about 5. We've got to go in and rebuild the station so that then over the next 5 years, a project from, I think, Monash University funding it, and they're going to send a whole bunch of about 30 or 40 scientists down to one base, but we've got to go in and build it. And I'm going to be part of that, certainly this year and potentially the subsequent years. But that, the station life and the voyage life can be a bit routine, and it's very maintenance heavy and everything, whereas this is back to like cool, good old fashioned, let's get a bunch of scientists, plonk them in the field with a couple of aviation operations people and some helicopters and a bunch of fuel drums, and you're in tents or in very basic accommodation. So that's my next project. After that, I don't know. I'm tempted to do a fiction book. Like, this is selling really well. So we're at book 10, we're at book 10,000 now. It's sold out. All 3 print runs have sold out really quickly. It's been trending on Booktopia and Amazon at different times, and which they update that hourly. So 1 minute it's kind of a bestseller, and then it's like book 1,000. You're like, oh. So some of that stuff I'm kind of like, I don't know what's going on with these websites and how they do a bestseller. But yeah, the book's been a great journey as well. And I'm glad I got it right, because a number of the team helped fact check it and get the story right and reframe the characters and everything. So really just enjoy that for now, and we'll see what happens next.
Congratulations.
All right, cheers. All right, I don't know how I'm going for time. It's up to you guys. I'm happy to stand here all day.
David, you were speaking, I think it was the previous question, about looking forward to when you were going to come home. And I'm just wondering, from the perspective of maintaining hope, the experience with COVID was that we started out thinking, a couple of weeks will be fine. And then we had these waves of disappointment where the next lockdown came or the next challenge came. And after a while, you start thinking, will we ever get out of this? Did that ever happen to your team where they thought, what if we never get out? What if it's years and years here? And then the second question I had, well, not so much a question as a comment, you haven't answered the sex question.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good one.
Just reminding you.
So the first part, yeah, absolutely. And that was probably one of those discussions that out of like The Martian, watching that and then having these discussions about what would second winter look like. Myself and the chef who was my deputy, so her and I had a really great relationship to manage this stuff quietly, but then openly, where people wanted to be engaged. There was a number of the team that didn't, they just wanted to know, like, when are we going home? And then there was others that are like, if we are going to stay here longer, or what happens if the internet just goes down? And what are we actually, the boats we've got are not going any further than about 2 nautical miles offshore. So we're like, wow, we've got an old HF system to like get on the ham radio and start to try and talk to people. But you'd start to go, oh, what do we actually do? And there are contingencies in terms of fuel rationing and food rationing and all sorts of other stuff that some people found solace in being involved in that planning, to know that there is a plan. And having a plan for every contingency, certainly like rolling lockdowns and COVID not being over, and then monkeypox and all this stuff, you go, right, having different plans on the shelf so you can take one off and go, oh, that's all right, this has happened. We've got a plan for that as a family, as a business, as an individual, as a government. You go, oh, that's right. And the federal government and any government's got these, you've got your plans, and you just pull that off the shelf. And the other one, I had a great chat, so great little segue as well. So it was sitting next to a partner from EY on the plane, and we started, when you're sitting on a plane in Canberra when you're supposed to be in Newcastle, you start chatting. So we had a good chat about this in terms of the human mindset and how chaos and change are actually normal states of affairs in the animal world and for human history. But we created a society that was really, really comfortable. And if it's constantly just seeking your comfort zone, you'll struggle, because half the world and half the time it's always going to be chaos. So you have to have your cave, but you have to be equally excited about when you get out of your cave to go and forage for berries or hunt a wildebeest or whatever that we used to do in that modern context. And outside it's a wild and crazy world, and being comfortable out in the wild and going back to your cave and having that balance. And anyway, it's quite a philosophical conversation for 8 o'clock in the morning, stuck on a plane in Canberra. But we were having that chat about change and adaptation, and he'd seen that at EY and in the corporate world, and I chatted about my story, and yeah, we had some common ground. So that's kind of how we deal with that. The sex question. So everyone's grown up. So it's the only person that's like in the Antarctic operating procedures, the only person that is not to engage in physical relationships with anyone on station is the station leader. So I don't know if you can cut the camera, but one of the alternate titles for the book from my mates was 538 Days Without Sex. But certainly in the first summer, when the gender balance was about 60-40, most of the scientific community had a higher percentage of females. The tradie and operations support side was more male, and they got along like a house on fire. So, yeah. But very thin walls on an Antarctic station too. So if you do get up to things, people tend to know about it pretty quickly. And you've got to live with them for the next few months. So a one-night stand in Antarctica is not a one-night stand. Cool.
Hey, great to hear you talk, like a really a fascinating story, and also in the way that you say it. So thank you very much for coming along.
My pleasure.
I'll ask another two-barrel question, one of them related to a film. John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yep, we've seen it. We watched it down there. We watched the sequels and read the books, and we've read Ice Station as well as the other. Yeah, so yeah.
And then the second one, a little bit more serious, is in a situation like that, did you find that routine worked for you or against you?
Great.
Or different?
No, I love that question, because that was one of the things when COVID first came in and lockdowns and work from home came in, everyone got fascinated by routine, and like, oh, build your routine. The flip side of that is build your routine, but build flexibility into it, and be aware that you don't just rebuild a comfort zone kind of fortress within your new routine. And we saw this on station, that you get people to be like, oh, hey, actually we're gonna send a field, it's good weather, we're gonna send the field party out on Tuesday instead of Wednesday, and blah blah blah. And someone will be like, oh, but I've got kitchen duty, and every 23 days you have to do kitchen duty, and you're like, mate, that is the one thing everyone can do. That is the most flexible of all the rosters. If you're the on-call diesel mechanic, there's only 3 of you. You can't swap that, it's harder to swap, but you're like, oh, I'm on kitchen duty. And so routine for a number of us became this fortress, and you have to be really careful and really aware of what parts of your routine need to be flexible and which parts of your routine are important. E.g., I get out of bed at 6 o'clock, I do as many push-ups as I can, I do some squats, and I do some yoga. That part of your routine, stick to that. Don't stick to like, oh, but we do our team meeting then, or we do this. All those things, you're like, well, you can move that. That's there. So kind of flexible routine would be the solution. But certainly had a lot of interpersonal and community problems based around routine working against us.
And in your team, did you find that some needed the routine where others had drove others nuts?
Yeah, and that's where, definitely. But that was the thing that, from the leadership perspective, you had to be able to just put some of your own thoughts aside and really just drive and go, these parts of the routine are important. Like the station meeting, which I hated them as much as others at times. But I'm like, we have to have a meeting. We have to have a community meeting. People are like, oh, it's at 10 o'clock on a Friday. Like, I've got this or I've got that. And you're like, the one thing a week we do. That's what we do. And if we can't all get together, the whole thing falls apart. And I'm like, right, if you can't do it at 10 o'clock, here's everyone else's schedules, find another time. Because 10 o'clock on a Friday is when we're doing it. And and occasionally there wouldn't be people there for good reasons. You're like, fine, but that's when we do the meeting, and you drive that. And same with some of the kind of enforced fun events. They're like, oh, do we have to do this? You're like, yeah, we do. We have to do that. That's part of the things that we have to do because we're doing it. And then they'd turn up and enjoy it. You're like, oh, you're having fun. They're like, So, look, I joke. We all had our moments where you're like, I don't want to do some stupid routine thing, but the routines do become really important to keep everyone together and reminding you you're all in that same boat. So, yeah.
So sitting as you guys were basically the arse end of the world, watching COVID spread country to country and seeing countries close down, seeing cities close down, whatever media you had access to, at what point did you go, the 22 of us are going to have to repopulate the earth?
It was interesting. We never had that discussion. Well, I was never involved in it.
You can't be.
I'm sure the doctor worried about that. He's like, oh, no, he'd been a rural doctor, so I'm sure he'd seen a lot of bush births and stuff. But it was hard to know who to believe. So we had a number of the team. The team were from all over, and 24 people, 25 million Australians. Probably not a million Australians were anti-vax and conspiracy theorists, but there were certainly members of the team that were towards that stuff, who were like, this is all just a hoax and this is ridiculous. And people from Melbourne versus Sydney going, well, why are you guys locked down more than us? And then I had a couple of mates in Sweden and stuff who were like, yeah, whatever. They just kind of said like, work from home if you can, and people are doing that. No one complained. No, we never hear from the health minister. We hear from the chief medical officer, and they say something, and the population go, okay. And you go, yet Australia was like, this is outrageous. I'm not doing anything. And then like, why aren't you doing everything? Government, why haven't you solved all of the problems? And then you just go, okay, parts of it were really hard to understand what the hell was the right answer and what was wrong. And I've really felt for the leaders the political leaders in Australia. I think we actually did a remarkably good job in terms of managing it, and credit to everyone in this room as being part of the government apparatus and all Australians. Like, Australia's in a really good position. No one gets credit for that. ScoMo doesn't get credit, Gladys doesn't get credit, Dan Andrews, Dominic, none of them are getting, we are so harsh on them, and it's so divisive yet so unfair to be like, wow, globally did a pretty good job, and maybe history will remember them well, but it's pretty tough. I can't remember what your question was, but anyway.
I'm interested in food.
You had a question.
Yeah, second one. I'm interested in food. You obviously have a lot of freezer space down there, but what happens? You mentioned a chef. I imagine salad's not on the menu a whole
It's a great question. We had a small hydroponics hut, so about a 20-foot shipping container with a hydroponics set up in it to grow kale and cos lettuce and baby tomatoes occasionally. So you would occasionally get fresh food. But think about how much of your diet now is frozen. And it's remarkable. Now, we didn't have avocados or bananas and some of those things. But we had fresh eggs that lasted a year and a half because of the way they can coat them and store them. The great thing is down there, you don't have any flies and bugs and stuff as well. So you can literally and it's minus 20 all the time. So you can't just leave stuff outside. But we had more than enough food and meat and even frozen veggies are still fine to be making stir fries and casseroles and other things with, frozen broccoli, peas, carrots, etc. It all lasts long. We ran out of that became controversial. Was like chicken flavoured 2-minute noodles. The good mee goreng noodles as well was part of that. And then there'd be rumours, because there's all these field huts and refuges in the sort of 400 square kilometre area around the station where you can go out for different field trips to these little places. And someone would be like, there's chicken noodles at that hut. I'm like, don't do it. And so that's we ran out of raw cashew nuts, and then we started running a cashew nut desalination program where you're getting like the salted cashew nuts and desalinating them, and they tasted washed, and you're like, they're still, you put them out for bar snacks, and so we ran out of the creature comforts, but yeah. We had 5 years of toilet paper. We checked. Yeah. We did check that one, so cool. All right.
Any last questions for David? No, let's please give him a big round of applause. That was excellent. Engaging and practical, which I think is awesome. Now, David did mention his books and his AWOL books, so we're very lucky that we do have 15 copies of David's book, oh my God, to give to our members. So our lovely CEO, Vicky, is going to be drawing them out. You call them, and you have to be in the room to get the book. That's our only rule.
6-point font again, babe.